Thank you. Let's see how the interpreting works. I think it's simultaneous interpretation. So I hope there's no problem with the fact that I don't speak English, which has to do with life itself and the development of struggles that we've been involved in throughout our lives. This has, and which have ultimately have led me to serve as president of Colombia at a time. Well, all of the presidents say these are tough times, and they are. But this moment has a circumstance which allows me to say that it is paradigmatic because what today's times are marking, I hope this is the case, is the separation, the transition from an era or an epoch from another. We are experiencing and in the midst of a change in epoch. And changes in epochs are always violent, confusing. They generate something which in the youth, which could be called nihilism. Like we just don't know where we're headed. We don't know where we're coming from. We don't know what we're doing here. And what are the paths that one should head down? The future is not that clear. And that's why a number of problems are stalking us as a society that are experienced more intensely as before: genocidal war, fentanyl, the dissolution of societies, the disappearance of nations, and so on. Cultures that are transformed because when it comes down to it, in the course of human civilization, human life is also a transition of cultures. I start from a methodological fact which has accompanied me a good part of my life, which is looking at things dialectically. That is a method that has to do with philosophy, no doubt, looking at things statically as if they were immutable, Cartesian, I would say. We can look at them that way, or we can look at things from the standpoint of their flow, that what is apparently static is actually part of a flow, and that flow, that movement, is based on the principle of contradiction. And the principle of contradiction always leads us to ever different, more different scales of movement that are greater than they were before. And if we look at the history of the present in this way, we have to say that we are in a somewhat tormentous flow, but things still are flowing. Things are not quiet. They're moving, and they have some contradictory movements or meanings, and it depends a great deal on the freedom achieved by the immediate future. It depends a great deal on the freedom achieved by human beings. What is coming immediately so that we can experience it, and the future a bit beyond, and I would say much beyond. And this change in epoch, well, one U.S. thinker mentioned it in these terms, has to do with modes of power, modes of production, and modes of energy. Even though when I was a young economist and studying, we studied modes of production quite a bit, modes of energy are also very important. Modes of energy were seen as a sort of byproduct of modes of production, as if they were subordinate agents to more profound changes that have to do with how we produce, and hence the way we relate among one another. That was the ABC of political economy, which is hardly studied in schools of economics today. But if I emphasize modes of energy, we find several explanations for the current moment. Science, not economics exactly. Physics has been putting a challenge to humankind. Climatology, biology, geology itself, even mathematics, if one makes mathematical calculations, poses a change in the mode of energy. And herein is centered the political discussion of the world. If I've come back from the COP30, some who were here may have been there. We find the same worldwide debate that was there 10 years ago when the conferences of the parties or COPs began, but in a more intense way. There is a need for a change in energy, how we produce and consume energy. The declaration out of the COP30 was not able to get to its end because Colombia decided to oppose it, saying it wasn't of any use. And according to the rules of the COP, a single country can block the final declaration. It's not a unanimous declaration of all the nations there. Colombia, and under my instructions, the delegate said at that time before the assembly, Colombia, we are not in agreement. We object. Why? Because a letter had been sent by thousands of scientists now called the UN panel of experts that summarized in a single paragraph what they wanted to tell us based on their experiments, research, and laboratory work, and so on. 75% of the climate crisis of global warming, which is the immediate cause, comes from the consumption of oil and coal, hydrocarbons in general, period. 75%. There are other causes, but 75% is a likelihood, a percentage that is determinant for doing something. And of course, when you set out to think not in technological or mathematical terms, but rather in the reality of life, what does it mean to change the mode of energy? Just looking around here in this room, in this hall, that change in a mode of energy implies profound changes, too many changes, even in how we dress. And these glasses that I'm wearing, if we undertake the analysis, it is a change in our existence. Pope Francis, who I liked very much, said that it is a crisis of civilization. And you can't resolve a crisis of civilization, if it can be resolved, except by adopting another type of civilization, not a government, not a regime. Those words are small. Of civilization. That is to say that the change in the mode of energy is the scientists are imploring to us, they're telling us what science is shouting at us in the face is a call for a change in civilization. And so we would have to be discussing this in all scenarios of science, of political debate, of the world discussion within our families, and in respect of our day-to-day lives. It's a matter of a political choice. And it emerges from science and moves straight to politics. I would say that economics does not understand this issue very well. I would say it's shameful, because if we go to the bottom of the cause of the crisis and of global warming, what we find is the economy, a way of producing, a mode of production, as they said 2 centuries ago. What causes the planet to warm? Well, oil, coal, gas, use of hydrocarbons, an increase in the letter C in the atmosphere. Carbon is the basis of life, but put into the atmosphere in a much higher proportion than existed in 1950. There's an exact date of initiation. The atmosphere was C, or carbon, millions of years ago, but we were not here. There was no life. That is what the theories of geology, archaeology say, that this planet was a dark color, like blue, but there wasn't life. Life only began with a specific temperature on the planet, which resulted from a climatic combination, perhaps by random, but it is 14 degrees centigrade average at the Earth's surface. Now, if this varies up or down, for us, minimally, because 14 degrees centigrade average is more or less how we live. A little cold for my taste. But one more degree, one degree less, and the whole chain of life, which is a chain, not individual, autonomous, solitary existence, but rather we all live in a chain of life, will change, will be broken. It will cease to exist if the changes are a bit more acute than 1, 2, or 3 degrees up or down. The moon is minus 18 centigrade, the Earth positive 14 centigrade at the same distance from the sun. What is the change? What's the difference? The atmosphere. This one, our atmosphere, has a composition that we need to take care of if we want the chain of life to not cease to exist. And here lies the fundamental problem, because what makes the chemistry of the atmosphere change is not geological action, as in so many hundreds of thousands of years ago. It's us. It is the human beings. But not just any human being. It's not the human species. It's not this group of mammals that have achieved the status of thinking beings, and herein lies our superiority, quote unquote, because we are the only thinking beings, it appears, in the universe. Thinking animals in the universe. If, as thinking beings, we have provoked a change through our ways of consuming and producing a change in the chemistry of the planet, then we have a consequence for us. Before us, a mode of production is about to break the chain of life, period. And if we break the chain of life, we won't be saved. The thesis of a U.S. Nobel Prize winner, I'm not sure if I remember the name, who wrote in 1986, he received 1986 Nobel Peace Prize, a professor. He said that nothing is going to happen to us because we are self-managing beings. That is to say, we can move about as though we lived in a bubble, a technological bubble that somehow separates us and can separate us 100% from our natural surroundings, and therefore from the climate. We can have a climate that is artificially constructed. Now, under that thesis, we could survive as a species, and only as a species, and only as a species we could survive the climate crisis. But human species has never lived apart from the other plant and animal species, visible, invisible, or what is inert. This would be the first experiment, and that experiment is not something we've ever experienced in our history. What we can say with some confidence is that if we change the chemistry of the atmosphere, and it changes drastically, the average temperature on planet Earth, if we change the average temperature, we will simply cease to exist. And in a lapse that is a time period that is not 1,000 years. It's been said that Stephen Hawking said it would be 2 centuries. He died some years ago. So the new experiments may bring us closer to 1 century, a century and a half. In a century or 150 years, we obviously, those of us who are here, might not be alive. But our children should be. My granddaughter, for example, if I make this calculation. So what will be of the life of our children and grandchildren? Now, in the mentality of a woman, what does that mean? In the mentality of a man, what does that mean? That for the first time we will be facing, we have never seen this in the history of the human species, that we may see our end as a species, not just as individuals, and something worse. Our children will live worse than we have lived, that we will, as older persons, live worse than we are now, and that our grandchildren will have a worse life than our children because they'll be living amidst the great climate collapse. It's also indescribable. One would have to make films in order to imagine the apocalypse apocalyptic times. The problem is that science tells us this. The problem is that at the COP30, it wasn't possible to adopt this paragraph, to say 75% of global warming is due to how we are consuming oil, coal, gas, hydrocarbons. And when Colombia made the proposal to introduce this into the statement, no country supported us. None. Why? Because a lobby was pushed. The government of the United States said, we are not going to go. So a lobby began among those, a lobbying effort among those who went. And those who went have specific interests in the oil and coal business. They are huge. They are practically the dominant part of this kind of economy, which now is ruling or prevailing in the world. So that lobby made it such that the nations, that is to say, politics, would hush up. And so the paragraph's not there. Politics silenced itself in the face of economic interest. We've known that that can happen for a long time. Politics is sometimes merely the expression of interest. But in the case of this event, which was perhaps the last one that could be held, the COP30, why did politics, knowing that we're on the verge of an abysm where the entire human species could fall off and could collapse, did not speak out? So why not repeat what science has told us, and rather they repeated the phrase put forward by the economic interests, which today are suicidal? Well, that's the point we're at. How can we achieve then that the nation, how can we get the nations to do something? The nations can do something, as I discovered yesterday. This is, how is it that, after the centuries, what we call nation states, which cost us revolutions, heroic struggles, debates, profound ideas in many parts of the world with different histories, which created this United States, but it also created the Latin American republics, which also gave rise to Western Europe as it is today, that went through the Cold War. It created the Soviet Union and so forth. All of this history that we've experienced from of the nation state has reached a point today. And so hence I speak of a change in epoch, because it is not capable. It was capable of defeating Hitler, although I would say it was the peoples who defeated Hitler. It was capable of taking a man to the moon, no doubt. I saw this on television. It's been capable of defeating COVID recently with difficulties, some greater than others, but it was defeated. It was the first tolling of the bells. Cambridge University undertook a study. It's not yet official, and it says that COVID comes precisely from the changes in animal customs in the chain of life because of global warming. But we have experienced it. We know what it's like. Nonetheless, we're still here. We haven't drawn all of the lessons from what we ourselves have experienced. But the nation state today is not capable, for example, of stopping a genocide. The United Nations was created to stop genocides. Numerous meetings were held even before the World War II in the League of Nations. It was founded so there would not be a world war. It was founded so that the Second World War not be repeated, the United Nations was. It was founded so that there would not be a repetition of the Holocaust. Nor the 25 million Soviets who died, the 20 million Chinese, or the 6 million Jews, speaking of a religious group, nor the Gypsies, or millions and millions. It was 50 million people, perhaps more, who died. It was the young people of the United States and the young people of the Soviet Union, plus those of Europe, but young people in the mountains, the cold mountains of Europe, who resisted in clandestinity, those who at the end of the day, it was they who at the end of the day defeated Hitler, and others in Asia in a different way, with stories, histories that we don't know because film shows us one or another part, but it were the peoples who destroyed one of the huge political dangers. Today, 70,000 dead, 20,000 children under these, according to some figures, 20,000 under the bombs. And we did not stop them, at least until the peoples took to the streets in many cities worldwide. And it hasn't been stopped, it's been transformed. The nation state was unable to stop the genocide in Gaza. And so we are in the face of a question. So I said this yesterday, what is the use of the United Nations? Everything that we as a civilization have built, international treaties, add into the human discussion, we add to that human discussion about the rights of people, of humanity, international humanitarian law, international treaties. There are whole schools of universities devoted to this topic. Of what use? The genocide is unfolding. Justice is not able to operate. What we have constructed is not of any use today. If we take it to our scale of America, which is to say the Americas, which is something I've repeated lately, Americas, missiles, bombs have been dropped in the Caribbean, and those who have died have been very poor people. I've met one of those families. I've not been able to meet any others. Were we able to stop them? And I leave an ellipsis there. Where Bolivar was born, bombs were dropped. Independent of what we may think of the regime that was there, it's the first Latin American city in all world history to be bombed. We had never known of that in our entire history. And that's where Simón Bolívar was born, who for us is our liberator. Simón Bolívar died with a chain around his neck, with a lock of hair that was given to him by Washington. Lafayette brought it to him, and he liked him so much that he died on the last day of his life. He had that around his neck, and it's now at a museum in Caracas. I haven't seen it. But what made it such that a man with a life of war and politics like Simón Bolívar would carry around his neck? Well, one always has one's memories, the woman he loved, but he also had this object, the lock of hair of George Washington. It's symbolic. And one could write about what that means from many perspectives. A sort of attraction, passionate attraction, and a rupture, passionate rupture once again, but it tied together moments on the same hemisphere of struggles for freedom, conflictive, contradictory. Contradiction is always present. One can transform oneself into the other side. We've experienced this in the Americas, the struggle for freedom in the 18th century. Well, at the end of the 18th century, there was another struggle for freedom in mid-19th century. You in the United States and we as well, because one had to fight for freedom once again, this time for the freedom for the slaves who in Colombia freed themselves. So the struggle for freedom is not just a moment, it's not just one battle, it's not a historic epic that is part of the past. It is a permanent struggle. We always fight for freedom. We always fight to emancipate ourselves. And we sometimes think that we can emancipate ourselves alone by cutting off certain mental chains. But it turns out we are a group, a species. So to free ourselves, we also need to cut off the chains that bind the species and the main chains that affect our thinking today. But let me get back to the topic. These struggles for freedom, what we have experienced before, today are in a context and a history that no doubt has changed, but that has led us to a conclusion. What was one which were independent and sovereign states, France was the prototype, a sort of example for the world, today are not capable of dealing with the situation alone or together. The United Nations does not appear to be capable. It is not capable. The Organization of American States, which is our great multilateral coalition in the Americas, was not able to stop the bombs from falling in the Caribbean. It was not able to stop the bombing of Caracas. So we are at a moment where there is a change in epoch. And so the point is, where are we headed? This is more or less what the press has said. The press doesn't analyze that much. It does keep a record. But where are we heading immediately? Not a century from now, but right now. What do we do? If we are in the face of these impotencies, what could activate a path that is not barbarism? Because if there's no civilization, history shows us that what we get is barbarism. One only need to read a little bit about the history of the Roman Empire. If a civilization falls by its own decadence because it no longer had the energy and it had nothing to propose to humankind for sustaining itself physically. If a civilization falls, what we see in practice is that it is not replaced by a superior one, but rather what we find is barbarism. For the Romans at that time, the barbaric persons came from outside. They were blonde, but not the Romans. They had blue eyes, but not the Romans. They did not drink wine. That was sacrilegious. They thought in Rome, they thought you could have no civilized person who doesn't drink wine. They would drink other things. So it's obviously a clash of religions, cultures, of organizational forms that did not know one another, even though the Romans tried, like Alexander the Great, to understand the other, who they were dealing with. Before they conquered them or seduced them, Rome was followed by barbarism. If civilization falls, what follows is barbarism. And we could describe it by other names. Third World War, for example. We seem to be close to. Are we close to it? Well, we all feel it. Of course, the danger is near. Now, what can stop it? If there are no norms, rules, if there's not a modus operandi, if there's no one to speak with, who can stop it? And if we turn to the specific case of Gaza, I would say it was the multitudes taking to the streets. It was words, something as simple as that. Power and bombs were opposed by the multitudes and words, dialogue, and the multitudes and lifting up the word. Is that a new way of being in the world or in the Americas? Could they have the potential or the power that the United Nations did not have to stop the genocide? And therefore, if it could have the potential to stop the genocide, could it change the modes of energy and preserve life on the planet? Which is the point for us that we must address now. And I hope so. Changing the mode of energy in mathematical physics and engineering terms is relatively easy. The data are there. The United States generates in 1 year 1,200 gigawatts. Now, I'm not an electrical engineer, but 1,270% is from fossil fuels. When I say fossil fuels, that means it generates the letter C, carbon, in the atmosphere. It produces a climate crisis. 70%. Coal, oil, gas, and what they call renewables today, which are plants that have carbon. And when they become energy, like when firewood is burned, they're renewable, but they cause climate crisis. And this is casting into the atmosphere. Ms. C, well, this spells climate crisis, chemically speaking. Now, if that 70% is replaced by clean energy, without carbon, that is to say, then we can solve a good part of the problem. The other is in China, Europe, and so forth. But this is a good part of the problem where we live, where you live and where I live as well. Because if you observe this number, 1,200 gigawatts, 70%, which is 840 gigawatts annually, to replace that in a way that does not cast carbon into the atmosphere. These are the dimensions of the mathematics and physics problem. It can be done. And those who have to study this can tell us that, yes, it can be done, and it can be done quickly. Not 50 years down the road when we have nothing to do anymore. It can be done quickly. Because if I go to the current day technological forms without thinking yet of utopias, and if I look at solar energy, I look at wind energy, I look at geothermal energy, and I look at hydric energy, which we've been tapping for some time, and I go to Latin America. I haven't added up for North America, but I look at Latin America. I find that these elements that don't generate carbon and that are forms of energy could give me enough energy for us and to replace the fossil fuel energy in the United States. Mathematically speaking, the answer is yes. Now, Mr. Roa is the president of Ecopetrol, our oil and gas producing company. He is an engineer. We've done the math. Maybe we're wrong, but you know what the potential of clean energy is in Latin America? The potential. Not already there, but potential. It's 5 times greater than the current generation of electricity in the United States. And it doesn't all have to be replaced, just 70%. So one could project growth and so forth. The increase in the computational capacity, which necessarily is brought along by the development of artificial intelligence, which is not so artificial, because when it comes down to it, it is not more than the reflection of human brains that cannot encounter themselves in the universe, but that come together and work in a team that are not so solitary. Well, at the end of the day, it's that. But there is a more in-depth discussion. That increase in the computational capacity, which is growing exponentially, well, the possibility of generating hydric, wind, solar energy, and geothermal energy the potential in Latin America could increase it in the world, and it could solve a good part of the climate crisis. That is to say, save ourselves, save us, like in the films, save ourselves. We, our children, our grandchildren. There will be problems further on. If that calculation is done, you can come up with a similar equation for Africa and Western Europe, likewise within Asia. So why was COP30 not able to even include this paragraph, which is to say to start taking action? How much does it cost to do this mathematical operation if I turn it into money? How much is it, Rowan? $1.5 million per megawatt. This is the math, high school math. You do the operation, what's the result? So it's $1.5 billion. We need 800 gigas. So we're talking about 1 trillion, 200 million, or 200 billion.
$1.2 billion en inglés. Trillones, ojo, porque hay un cero de diferencia y nos equivocamos.
Well, we have to be careful with the math because un billón in Spanish is 1 trillion and the billion in English is mil millones in Spanish. So 3.2 trillion in English.
Esa cifra es imposible.
And that figure is that figure impossible? Well, it's now in the U.S. These are the special drawing rights issued by the IMF during the times of COVID. So is it hard to get it? It's right here. So neither the numbers, nor the technologies, nor the money today represent a problem. It's not something that's impossible. Indeed, we could say it's practically easy. And on that depends our lives, your lives, those of you who live here, the people, whatever the color of their skin, whatever their cultural background, who have been coming together and flowing and become beautiful in flowing and in articulating with one another when they encounter one another and teach one another things. When that happens, and we have these basic data that are easy, and so life and culture and human civilization depend on this. So what's up with us? What's happening to us? What's happening to us is that the powers that be do not let us do it. It's that simple. What power? What powers that be? It could be the power of those who accumulate their profits, their interest, their supremacy on the basis of the fossil fuel economy, not the clean energy economy. And what I say could be very much criticized, the fossil fuel economy. I could speak for 7 hours, non-stop. I've tested it out. I can't do it. So you might have to give me a warning when time is going to be up. The powers that be don't let us do it. It's as simple as that. The money itself that we should use to clean up the atmosphere doesn't allow us to do it. The bombs don't allow us to do it. Those who manage money and bonds aren't conscious of the need to change the way in which we produce and consume energy because they make a living off of, or they live off of fossil fuels. And herein comes the dialectics again, the yin and yang. One says you can no longer put your finger on this water because you won't touch it once any time again. There was the discussion between Aristotle and one other philosopher. And my chief of staff is a philosopher. He's the one who's told me this. I try to not let the philosophers get too far from me. So if Heraclitus was first, Heraclitus said the principle of movement is that A is A and not A at the same time, or negative A at the same time. It's dialectical. If you look at something moving, it means it's there and it's not there at the same time. Since everything moves, indeed what seems to us to be inert, because there are different velocities, and ours is faster than that which is inert, and therefore we don't capture it. Einstein said, and who is not yet a quantum physicist, but Einstein said if space and time are relative, everything flows and moves, including that which is inert. Well, if that is so, then here we have a unit, the unity of those who are against us, who are defining our opponents, who are defining our very existence at this time. Yin and yang, clean energy, fossil fuel energy, mode of producing with clean energy, mode of producing with where there is a ever greater interaction among brains, figures, fiber optics, and so forth, and the contrary, which is fossil fuel energy, which which takes us to oil, coal, global warming, and hence the rupture in the chain of life. And that's it. It's a unity of contraries, but it has to be overcome. We can't stay here. We can't have this and that at the same time. A and negative A have to, or not A, have to begin to move. So we need to move. And in human cultures, moving means politics and culture. Politics related to power and culture, defining the change of epoch. Not just observing it, not just study it, those who are to study it. That's a debate from the 19th century. We're not here just to analyze the world, but to transform it. That's praxis. And the change in epoch has to do, therefore, with this. Changing the epoch means changing not just the mode of energy, mathematical, financial. It's probably what is correct and easy, but we have to change the relations of power. Relations of power is not a revolution like the French Revolution, which we studied before, or the revolutions that we ourselves carried out. Change in power today is much more complex. It begins with us, and it begins by all coming together in a way that is not limited to nation states. The nation states are not capable. The political parties vis-a-vis the nations and national power can help, but they are not determinant. No political party in the world was determinant for stopping the genocide in Gaza, not even the Arab political parties or those who were there, several political parties in Palestine. It wasn't possible. Only the multitudes, only collective decisions without permission to take to the streets to interconnect with one another. There was a huge demonstration in New York, which I saw via the internet, but it was connected to the one in Paris, to the one in Bogota. It connected to the ones in Indonesia, and so on and so forth. So a sisterhood is beginning to be built, which I would call human, a new way of organizing ourselves that doesn't necessarily go through a League of Nations, an Organization of American States, or a United Nations, and that can, if developed quickly like a planet-wide network, have the capacity to change aspects of power that are fundamental, such as, for example, having a declaration such as the declaration from the COP30 to have it tell the truth, to have that paragraph appear. And if that paragraph appears there, then the plan so that within the next 10 years, a decade at the most, we don't have so much time, so that we can make a transition without so much violence and without so much displacement and difficulties from one mode of energy to another mode of energy that necessarily means one mode of power to another mode of power. And I know that the questions are coming up, but I just leave you with this concern. What happens in the Americas where, instead of having countries who send what they say poison to the north, I don't believe that. I think we send a lot of culture and a lot of wealth through work, because work is the source of wealth. What we have is a power in the Americas which, on being based on the sun, on being based on the water, on being based on the wind, will become democratic. It's not that those who have oil have power to take oil away from others, which is what we're seeing today, but rather on doing this because where there is no sun, there's more sun in some places than others. We have a lot of sunlight. Where there's not water, well, if we take care of it, there's water in many places. This is the hemisphere of water. Where there's no wind, well, there's more wind in some places than others, but all three of these together indicate that the possibility for electrical generation can be democratized on Earth. And if electrical generation becomes democratized, each of us can now generate clean energy, each of us. If the mode of energy is democratized, then power will be
no
democratized.
corresponde a poderes autoritarios
And it
o
would not
dictatoriales,
correspond to authoritarian or
corresponde a un
dictatorial
poder que se
powers. It would
disgrega en la
correspond
sociedad,
to a
que se
power
disgrega en el individuo, en la
that
familia, pero somos manada.
disaggregates
Entonces en la
individuals
sociedad.
and families,
Y
but we
esa
are
vez,
all
termino,
together,
me
and so it
coge
would be
aquí la
society.
palabra.
And with
Esa
this,
vez que
I
podamos vivir
conclude.
así,
I don't
que
know who
tiene
is
que
going
ser
to speak
rápido,
next.
casi que
We
inmediatamente los
we
cerebros
need to make this
se
change.
podrán
We need
juntar
to bring our
libremente con los
brains
otros
together.
cerebros del mundo y la
All the
capacidad
brains of the world can come together,
de
and
el
our
ser humano en
capacity,
este planeta
the
será
capacity
tan
of human beings
poderosa
on the planet will be
que no
just as
solamente
powerful,
cuidará el planeta,
or so
sino que
powerful that
podrá
it will
llevar
not
la vida
only
a
take
las
care of us
estrellas,
on
como
this planet,
decían los
but will be
romanos,
able to
ad
take life to
astram.
the stars, as the
Gracias, muy
Romans
amables.
said. Thank you very much. Very kind. Thank you very much, President. I will now put some questions to you to go further into some of the points. The questions come from those who are here with us. The first question is from Andrew Miller of Amazon Watch. Colombia was the first country to declare the Amazon as a free reserve. How for energy? How is that vision being seen today, and how will it be implemented in the future? The Amazon region today is still a sponge. It's paradoxical. The north is a chimney emitting CO2 today. Today, the south has a sponge. The best sponge of all is the ocean, but it is beginning to fail. It has some breaking points, some points of no return, irreversible. One of those points is if the Amazon jungle burns. So instead of absorbing CO2, it would release the CO2 that it has absorbed over time into the atmosphere. That would be a point of non-return from which we would not return. Now, today, parts of the Amazon jungle are burning sometimes as a matter of human will, which is terrible. I call that covetousness, because the global warming is creating microclimates that lead certain areas to dry up and then burn, and the jungle burns. We want to take care of it. We have an agreement with, especially with Brazil. The Brazil-Colombia axis has been attractive for other countries, but this is what is fundamental. Brazil has the largest part of the Amazon, but the most difficult part is the part of the jungle that reaches the Andean range. Why? Because that is where the water of the jungle is born, emerges. The water of the jungle, if it comes from the mountains, if it's cut off or exhausted, any of these phenomena would lead to the death of the entire Amazon. And that, so long, that's would be a point of no return. It is like the ice in Greenland, the oceans. There are few jungles. The Amazon jungle is perhaps the largest one. The one in the Congo, the one in Indonesia has been seriously impaired. These are the climatic pillars on which life is sustained. And so South America has, Colombia among these countries, a huge responsibility. This is a worldwide responsibility that has not been listened to very much, in my experience. Now, what we have done is, well, we have existed for the last 40 years depending on oil and coal, especially coal. Colombia is among the largest coal reserves in the world, and my neighbor Venezuela, we used to be a single country, has one of the largest oil reserves in the whole world. Now, if all of this goes up into the atmosphere, then this lecture would never be repeated ever again. So it's a sort of weapon of mass destruction, but I don't want to get into that. That would be another issue. So I don't think that the coal from Colombia or the oil of Venezuela should be brought out of the ground. If this and it comes out of the earth as
Por
a
eso,
part
como
of the mode of
presidente ahí
production,
en
we
Colombia,
will go
lo que
extinct.
he
So as
buscado
president
con
in Colombia, what I
éxito
have sought
relativo
with relative
es
success
quitarle la dependencia a la
is
economía
to
colombiana del carbón y del
make
petróleo.
the Colombian economy
Hoy
depend less
exportamos más
on
agricultura e
coal
industria, es decir, en
and
3,
oil.
ya 4 años lo
And
logramos.
we've had more
Es
agricultural
transición,
exports
todavía
in
falta
these
mucho más.
3.5 years. It's
Y
a point of
cuidar la
a matter of
selva
transition.
amazónica de
There's much more
cualquier
to be done, and we
explotación
should take
minera,
care of the
petrolera
Amazon
o
uh,
económica.
jungle to make sure there's
Y
no
aunque
mining,
aquí
oil,
vamos
or other
teniendo
economic
éxito, cada vez
exploitation. And
menos
here
hectáreas deforestadas,
we are
aún nos
successful.
falta.
There are fewer and
Hemos
fewer hectares
declarado la selva
deforested, but we
amazónica
still
como
have
una
so much
zona de
more to do.
reserva,
We have said that the
que no
Amazon
es
is
solo
a
de Colombia,
reserve zone that belongs
es
not only
una
to Colombia.
reserva
It
para
is a
la vida de la
reserve
humanidad y es un
for
ejemplo
life on
que
Earth,
queremos dar.
and it's an example that we want to give. Thank you.
La segunda pregunta viene
The
de
next
Connor
question is from Connor
McQueenie. La pregunta
McQueenie.
es, ¿cómo
The
maneja la
question is,
contradicción
how do you
entre
handle the
preservar la
contradiction
naturaleza
between
y
preserving nature
extraer
and
minerales para la
extracting
transición energética?
minerals for
Mira,
the energy transition?
lo dije aquí antes,
I said
nos
this here
movemos
before.
bajo principios de contradicción.
We are moving under principles of
Pensar que el
contradiction.
ser humano
To
que
think that
consume
the human being
para
who
poder vivir
consumes in order to
no
live
va a afectar el entorno,
is not going to
pues,
impair the environment is utopian thinking.
el ciclo vital
The
siempre conlleva su contrario.
life cycle always
fin de-
entails
El
its
fin de la vida.
contrary, its opposite,
La
the
vida
end
se
of
pone a sí
life.
misma.
Life
Lo vemos en las especies animales, en nosotros.
can
El
end
problema
itself.
son las
We see this in
velocidades.
animal species. The problem are
De lo
the
que está
velocities.
aconteciendo aquí es que la
But
vida
what is
humana
happening
bajo
here is that
las
human
formas de
life,
organización actual
under the
en
current
unas
forms
sociedades,
of
no en
organization,
toda la
in some
humanidad,
societies, not in all of
tiene un
humankind,
ritmo
have
que no es
a
sostenible
pace
con
that is
la
not
Tierra.
sustainable
Ni
for the earth,
químicamente en muchos aspectos,
neither chemically
ni
in many
vitalmente.
aspects nor
Es decir,
vitally
los ciclos del
speaking.
capital son mortales.
That is to say, the cycles of capital are
Y por
lethal.
tanto no se trata de ver
That's
cómo
it.
los ciclos de la
So
Tierra
it's not a
corren a la misma
question
velocidad,
of seeing
imposible,
how the life cycles on
sino
Earth have
cómo
the
los
same
ciclos
velocity. No, that's
del
impossible.
capital
But how the
se
cycles of
desvanecen.
capital can vanish.
Y esto en términos más concretos, ¿qué significa?
And what does this
Que
mean in
nuestros
more
ciclos de
specific terms?
consumo, que cada
That
vez deben
our
ser
cycles
más
of consumption, which should be
inmateriales,
ever more
nuestros ciclos de
non-material,
consumo de energía, para
are
ponernos en el
cycles
tema
of
concreto de la
consumption
energía,
of energy, so as to focus on the specific
si
topic of
superan
energy.
las energías que
If
llegan a
they
la
go
Tierra,
beyond the energy that comes to
lo
Earth,
que más llega es el Sol, si
and what
llegase.
comes most is the sun.
Esto lo dijo el economista Romer Georgesco Roeder.
This was said by
Un gran
economist
disidente en todos los sentidos,
Georgesco
porque se escapó de
Roder.
Rumania,
He
llegó
is
a
a
Nueva York y casi que
dissident.
tuvo
He
que
escaped
escaparse
to
de Nueva York y
Romania,
nunca
went
le
to New
dieron
York,
el
and
Nobel.
practically had to
Pero
escape
escribió
New
un
York, and he
libro de
never got a Nobel
articulación de las
Prize, but he
leyes de
wrote
la
a book
termodinámica con la
articulating the
economía.
laws of thermodynamics with
Yo
economics.
creo que merecedor del premio Nobel desde
I
hace
think
mucho
he
tiempo, ya murió.
deserves and has deserved the Nobel Prize for
Porque
some time. He's died
dijo esto
now
exactamente.
because he
Él lo
said
dijo en
precisely
los años
this.
70.
He said this in the
La
1970s.
energía que debemos consumir
The
máximo
energy that we should
tiene que ser la
consume
energía
at
del sol que
most
llega a la superficie de la Tierra.
has to be the solar
Máximo.
energy that reaches the surface of the Earth.
Obviamente seríamos casi los únicos.
We'd be practically
Luego, si
the
pasamos de
only
ahí,
ones. And if we surpass
nosotros no
that,
somos sostenibles en la Tierra.
we are not sustainable on
Pero
Earth.
eso no es un problema, porque si las
But that's not a
velocidades no
problem
lo
because
permiten
if the
y
velocities
las formas de poder varían, y el ser humano
don't
puede
allow
ser
it
libre en cualquier
or
parte del
allow it,
planeta,
and the forms of
y
power
se puede
can vary, and human
intercomunicar
beings
como
can
ya
be
lo
free
hacemos,
anywhere on the Earth. And if
más
we can intercommunicate,
los
as we
cerebros
already do,
interconectados
even
de la
more so,
humanidad son
the
capaces de
intercommunicated brains
obtener
of humankind are capable
energías de otras partes.
of obtaining energy from
Y
elsewhere.
es lo que yo llamo
And
quizás
that's what
la misión humana,
I call
la misión de nosotros como
the human
especie.
mission,
No sé
our
cómo
mission
vivimos
as a
simplemente acá,
species.
bien, felices,
It's
intensos por lo
how we
menos,
live here is happy,
intensamente
and
vivimos,
we
sino
live
cómo
intensely.
llevamos esto que
But we
tenemos
need to
aquí, y es
figure out
único en el
how
universo,
can we take
único,
this, which is unique in the universe,
hacia los seres inertes de más allá,
to the
más
inert
allá de la Tierra.
beings beyond Earth.
Películas de ciencia ficción así,
Science
pero lo
fiction
podemos
movies,
hacer, ¿y por qué no lo hacemos?
but we can do it.
Porque es
And
una
why don't
forma de
we do it?
romper
because that would be a way of breaking down the second law of thermodynamics. It was Fourier who spoke of this, I believe. I don't remember so well. The second law of thermodynamics is the dissipation of heat. It's eternal death, total cold. The dissipation of heat in the universe. But human beings can have a cycle that is different from the second law of thermodynamics, so as to jump out of that determinism. Well, only if we stay alive today will we be able to find out. Only if we survive as a species and can overcome today's problems will we be capable of break down a series of equilibria and jump forward, not just being stuck in the death, jumping ahead. But this is a science fiction to some extent. I don't want to go too far. Smart energy, the collective energy of humankind, have we gauged it? Have we measured it? Einstein measured it when they got the nuclear formula. Is life itself a form of energy? And if life is a form of energy, then it doesn't die. It is transformed. I don't want to go into anything esoteric, but it becomes transformed. And so humankind, as a flow of civilization, can be transformed by growing. And growing is treating this planet as though it were a beautiful crib, but going out to what we might want to explore and to construct a civilization. Okay. We have now another question from a student whose name is Emma. The question is as follows. How does one mitigate the risks and concessions in favor of the economy when the goal is sustainability? It is movement, as I was saying. If we need to get some minerals, copper, and others, I think it's 16 different ones, in order to build a solar panel. That is the second law of thermodynamics. We can't escape it. There is not any romantic sustainability. No. There is production and consumption, necessarily. Production and consumption. And consumption consumes what is around it. Or like a child will eat itself, its own body mass, if it is hungry and has nothing to eat. The problem is to have these sustainabilities that exist at higher level equilibria, and that implies movement and thinking on the part of human beings. That's what the Amerindians did when they came through Alaska. They came through there, they came down to Colombia and so on. A movement that was putting up with equilibria, finding ever more fertile lands. And we've grown to the point of being about 7 billion. And they say we can't have more than 10 billion. But we are older and older, there are fewer babies, but we are approaching a point of equilibrium that we need to overcome. And as we approach that equilibrium that we have to overcome so as to move to another, we need to change the modes of energy and the modes of power together. That can't be done separately. So sustainability has to be seen as a fluid as well, or as a flow as well. It becomes unsustainable if we're not able to jump ahead to another form of equilibrium. And it becomes sustainable as we skip ahead to higher levels of equilibrium, and that is done in movement. That is a movement. There was a second part of this question that should be interesting for you as president. How does one communicate with society to achieve the transformation? How does one communicate the importance of all this? Well, in Colombia, levels of education have not been the best. Peasant farmers who already know about the climate crisis, well, their customs change. Because they're experiencing it. The river has come to where they are. There are a lot of flooded lands in Colombia. The peasant farmers already know that there is a problem in the
y ya le
equilibrium of the
llega la
planet,
información, etcétera.
and they're getting
Y
information
la
and so on.
cantidad de manifestaciones contra el petróleo
The
en Colombia que se han
number
detenido
of
es simplemente porque estamos brindando una salida,
expressions or
pero eran
demonstrations
inmensas
against oil that,
en
well, we're
cada
trying to
punto, en
find
cada
a
región.
solution. They
Había
were immense
realmente
in
una
each point, in
movilidad
each region. There
por la
was
sostenibilidad, por el agua,
mobility for
fundamentalmente, una
sustainability, for agua, for
movilizaciones
water in
populares
particular.
por el agua.
These were popular
Entonces,
mobilizations
¿eso qué es? Eso es conocimiento.
because of water. What is that? It is
Eso es
knowledge.
comunicación, obviamente.
That is communication,
Pero es
obviously.
fácil la comunicación para la transición porque la
Communication
gente
for the
tiene un
transition
instinto
is
animal.
easy because
A
people
nuestro
have an
mayor
animal
aliado es el
instinct.
instinto de sobrevivencia.
Our greatest
Y
ally
creo
is
que lo que
the
estoy diciendo aquí un poco
instinct for
abstractamente es
survival. I
relativamente
think
fácil
that
en el
what
mundo.
I'm saying here
Decir
in
que le tocó a la
relatively
humanidad
abstract
defender la vida,
terms is easy to communicate worldwide,
decirle a
to
una
say it is
persona, a
time
un
for
hombre, a una
humankind
mujer,
to support
hermano,
life,
hermana, te
to
tocó
tell someone, my brother, my
porque es la
sister,
defensa de la vida, la
if
tuya.
this is what you must do because it's a matter of
Estamos
defending
hablando del vecino
your
en
lives,
otro
our
país,
lives.
la tuya
We're
misma.
talking with a neighbor or with
Decirle a las
another next
mujeres
country
defiendan la
over.
vida,
Women who defend
quizá un poco
life,
más fácil que a los hombres.
it might be easier to get
No,
through
no
to
nos
them
gusta
than men.
brindarla, pero la
We
mujer
like to take
cuida mucho
risks
más la
when it
vida.
comes to life, but women
Es
take
decirle a
much
las
better care
mujeres de
of life.
cualquier lado
But
del
to
mundo,
tell women anywhere in the world
les toca pasar a la primera línea de
that
esta
they
batalla
must
porque es una
step
batalla.
forward to the front lines of this battle
Porque
because it
toca
is a
defender
battle,
la vida, te toca
because
defender los
one
hijos.
must, since
¿Por
one must
qué?
defend
Por
life,
tu
one must
sueño de
defend
tenerlos.
one's
Muchos
children or
han
one's
llegado
dream of
incluso
having
a
children.
la conclusión de no tenerlos.
And
Y
many
por
have
esos
reached
números
the
que nos estamos
conclusion of
acercando
that
al
they should not
borde de
have
la
children.
sostenibilidad.
And if those numbers go
Incluso
up,
me
then we'll
atrevería,
be approaching the
hay que
we'll
probarlo,
be on the verge of
a decir que
sustainability.
el crecimiento del consumo del
Indeed, I
fentanilo es
think that the growth in the consumption of fentanyl
porque
is
es la droga
because
de la crisis climática.
it is the drug of the
Es
climate
decir, es
crisis.
muerte,
That is
no
to say,
es
it is
que el
death.
placer, ni que la sensación, ni
It's
que a
not,
ver
people
cómo
don't
es
take
eso,
it
no.
for pleasure or sensation or to
Al
just check out what it's
acercarnos
like.
al
No.
borde de un
As we
equilibrio
approach
a punto de romperse,
an equilibrium
sin
that is
que
about
esté el
to
otro
experience rupture
abismándose más
uh,
arriba, en la historia,
with
muchos individuos se suicidan.
with many looking at those above them,
¿Cómo
many
entendemos eso?
individuals commit
¿Por
suicide,
qué
and
se
that
extiende el
is the
fentanilo?
mechanism. Why is fentanyl
¿Cuál es
use
la lógica
spreading? What's the
matarse?
logic of killing oneself?
¿Por qué no se quiere vivir?
Why? Because people,
No se
those
quiere
people,
vivir.
no longer
Y
want to
esto
live.
en otras muchas. Entonces es la cultura de la extinción.
So it is a culture of
¿Por qué no
extinction.
salimos en contra de un genocidio?
Why don't we oppose a
Porque
genocide?
ya estamos en la cultura de la extinción y entonces
Because we're
la
now amidst the culture of
indiferencia
extinction, and hence
ante la muerte
indifference
colectiva
in the face
es
of
mucho
collective
más
death
alta que en los tiempos
is
en
much
donde
higher than in the
estamos en
times in
otra
which
cultura, la
we
cultura
were
del
in
vivir,
another
la
culture,
cultura
the
del
culture
progreso,
of
la
living,
cultura
the
de que
culture of
vamos a estar
progress,
mejor,
the culture
la
of, well,
cultura de
we're
la
going to be
libertad,
better
la
off, the culture
cultura
of
de que vamos a
freedom,
construir una nación.
the
Son
culture of
tiempos
building a
culturalmente
nation.
diferentes. La cultura de
These
que
are
vamos a
culturally
derrotar a
different
Hitler.
times. The culture of
¿Cómo se
let's
movieron
defeat
todos los
Hitler.
muchachos
How did all
de
of those
aquí
young
a
people
Europa a pelear
go from
y a
here to Europe
matarse
to fight
por una
and to get
causa?
killed for a
¿Por
cause?
qué he visto eso? Porque hay una causa, hay un
I've seen
porqué.
that
Pero
because
cuando
there's a
estás ya en
cause,
el
there's a
borde,
reason why. But if you're on the
empiezan a
verge,
forjarse una serie de anticulturas
then a number of
que son
anti-cultures
para
begin
alistar al
to
ser humano a
form.
la extinción,
And this is to prepare
en las
human
cuales
beings for
obviamente no
extinction.
podemos caer.
And obviously,
Tenemos
we
una
can't fall into
misión,
these.
somos los
We have a
únicos seres
mission.
pensantes.
We are the only
No sé
thinking
a cuántos
beings.
años luz de
I don't know
distancia,
how many
no
light years
sabemos en la
away.
edad de pronto,
We
pero
don't know.
no hay
Maybe in
más
the far
que nosotros.
beyond, there's others,
Y
but
por tanto nos
as far as we
corresponde a
know, there are no
nosotros
others than
actuar.
ourselves, and therefore
Somos
we
los
must take action.
responsables.
It is we who
Algo
are
nos ayudará,
responsible.
pero entre
Something will
nosotros
help
tenemos
us,
que ayudarnos antes
but
que
we
nada
have to
a
help one another
saltar
before anything else
cambio de
to
época y poder vivir
make it
la
through this
siguiente.
change and epoch and to be able to live in the next one.
Bueno.
Perfecto. Con esa idea,
Well, with
sabemos
that
que tiene una agenda muy
idea,
llena de
we
citas y
know that you have a very busy
obligaciones,
agenda
así que lo
and
vamos a
other
dejar aquí,
obligations, so we're going to leave it
aunque
here,
seguro hay muchas más preguntas
even no doubt there are
a
many
hacer
more
y
questions to
muchos
be
más
asked
asuntos para discutir.
and many other matters
Ha
to
sido
discuss.
un honor
It has been
grandísimo estar
a
aquí con
great
usted, un
honor
placer grande,
to have you
orgullosos por
here. It's been a
entendimientos,
great
ideas.
pleasure to hear from
Y
you,
le
your
damos un
sentiments, your
enorme
ideas.
gracias
and we are most grateful to you. We also thank the Dean of the School of Foreign Service for introducing you, and we wish you an excellent trip back to Colombia, and we hope you'll be back here very soon. I hope the same, if you invite me, if you invite me. Thank you, very kind of you.
¿Cómo estás? Tiempo sin verlo. ¿Estás ahora? Sí, sí, yo me acuerdo.
Me encantó lo que usted dijo y esperemos que así sea.
Vamos a ver.
Necesitamos, el mundo lo necesita. Se lo agradezco muchísimo.
Ustedes tienen que hacer un esfuerzo grande. Ustedes saben. Gracias. Vamos. Bueno, ¿cómo estás?
You were telling me to stop, weren't you? Okay, okay. Because there was a question about Venezuela. I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to go there.
A trasladarte a Nueva York. Uy,
That was a good note to end
estoy
on.
cangalándome.
Basically. Yeah. Just stop right here. Okay. Great.
Así.
Thank you, Joe.
Así me lo llevo.
He is. He's a great storyteller.
I mean, it's funny that they would question like that.
No, and he enjoyed it.